with introducing the members of our Justice and Peace Education Issues Committee, as well as starting the very first with Trevor Thompson, who most, I think everyone knows, but in case you're not part of St. Francis Parish, he is the director of our Justice and Peace Ministry and the Education Issues Committee and a number of other justice and peace issues fall under his jurisdiction. I want to tell you just a little bit, this is a commercial. I want to tell you just a little bit about our committee so that in case you might be interested in joining us, you'll have an idea. So what our committee does is advocate goals that focus on all students successfully achieving their aspirations, particularly now as the inequities in a variety of aspects of education have been revealed and even exacerbated by COVID-19. We support the goals of One Wake. You may be familiar with One Wake. If not, it is a nonpartisan, multi-ethnic, multi-issue community organizing group. St. Francis Parish is one of nearly 50 institutions in Wake County that belong to it. And its goal is to identify common problems, find workable solutions, and then implement systemic changes within our county. One of the groups, and especially one of the focuses this year under One Wake, is education, as are jobs and affordable housing. So because our focus is education, we are particularly focusing on the goals of the Wake County Public School System. But not only do we have that because of the tenets of our Catholic social teaching, we also strive to help all students that are marginalized and all that are most in need among us. So it's not just working with Wake County, but also a broader area. So if you're interested in learning more about us or in joining us, we would love to have you. Please reach out to any one of the members that I'm about to introduce to you. And you can find us on Realm if you're a St. Francis parishioner, and can contact us that way as well. So for our members, I'll start first with Farrell Guillory. Farrell, you want to say hello so they can see your shiny face there?
Hello, it's nice to be here with everyone. This is an important conversation and I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks. Bill Laxton is a member.
Hello, it's great having a rock star like Pam chairing this committee.
I did not pay him for that now. I did not pay him for that. Sharon Winsler.
Hello, it's great to see all of you here, and I think it's going to be a good evening. Thanks for coming.
And you met Mary Ann and Angie Morris.
Hi, everyone. Glad you're here tonight. We're really looking forward to this discussion and to your input. Hope we can ease some frustrations or questions as well. Thanks.
So as you can see, we're a small committee, mighty but small. So if you're interested, please consider joining us. Before I introduce the panelists and we get into the discussion, I'd like to just start this evening with a little prayer. It's a special prayer of blessing for heading back to school. So if you could just quiet yourself for a second. In the name of the Father and the Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Dear Heavenly Father, for all the children starting and returning to school, send your Holy Spirit as their guide and protector. Keep them free from danger and unnecessary harm. Put our sons and daughters in the right place at the right time to receive your grace. Let them learn and grow strong. May the presence of your Spirit fill their hearts. Help us to mature as parents and caregivers. Bless every family, O Lord. We entrust our children to you, dear God, since from the beginning they are yours to keep. In the name of the greatest Son of all, Jesus Christ, amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. All right, here we go now. Introduction to our panelists. First, we have Sarah Bratton, who is the assistant principal at Forest Pines Drive Elementary School. Sarah, you want to just say hello before we get into the questions?
Good evening, everyone. I'm happy you're all here.
Chuck Small, a school counselor at Enloe Magnet High School. Chuck?
Hi, everyone. It's good to be here, and I look forward to a great evening.
And Mike Watson, principal of the Franciscan School.
So good evening. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for your interest.
Unfortunately, Destiny Hartman, who was on our panel, she's an assistant principal at Durant Road Middle School, was called away to Maryland for a family circumstance, and so she couldn't join us tonight. But I'm sure Chuck and Sarah will be able to hopefully cover most of the questions you might have. Okay, well, I took all the questions that everyone submitted and I tried to group them. And of course, one of the, well, they were actually pretty easy to group together. There's definite concerns with each one. So the first one's about masks, the mask protocols. And so we want to know what the latest expectations are for wearing masks. If there is at Wake County Public Schools a different ruling for different age levels, please let us know that. And then one of the questions was what data is being used to mandate the masks for children. So lucky you, Sarah, being the elementary assistant principal, we'll start down there. What have you got to share with us about that?
So Wake County Public School System is following the CDC guidance. And I don't know if you all know, the state of North Carolina has a toolkit, a strong schools toolkit that provides the guidance around safety regarding coronavirus that we are all held accountable to following. Within that guidance, there is some guidance that say that all schools should, and we are required to do that. And then there are also recommendations that we could also implement if feasible. The guidance that we are required to follow is that all students are wearing masks at all times in the building unless they are actively eating or drinking. At an elementary school level, we have recess. So when students are outside, masks are optional. So if you have a student coming to Wake County Public School System, have a conversation about your expectations regarding your child's masking outside, as well as masks are required on all Wake County and vendor transportation.
And they were asking if children that are, since you're emphasizing the all, and since it's actually becoming applicable even to adults that are vaccinated, I'm assuming that's even children or older students that are vaccinated, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
There are some occasions where students might have face mask accommodations if they developmentally or behaviorally cannot tolerate them, and there is a process in which the family and the doctor submit a request that the school reviews. So there might be in some very specific circumstances where some students might not have masks on all day.
Okay. And that was the last question about the mask part, was how will you deal with students who do not want to wear a mask? Chuck, I think it might be your turn.
Well, I think, to a certain degree, we got kind of a head start on that back this spring, because when we moved to Plan B, which was that students, not all students were in the school building. The students who were in virtual academy stayed home, but the students who were not in virtual academy came back to school in the spring. And the expectation at the time that they came back was that the masks were on. And, it was a concern, at I think it's different developmentally at the elementary school level than it is at the middle and high school level. With the elementary school level, there are some questions about what do students know and how are they used to things, and kind of the learning aspect. Whereas with middle and high school, it's usually more kind of a classic case of, are students resistant? Is it part of the adolescent rebellion, that kind of thing? So, during the winter, while we were all still at home, we were wondering about that. But honestly, when we came back to school in February, March, we did not have incidents about that. I really do think that most students take it seriously. They know that the situation that we're facing is a serious health situation, and it's not something to be messed with. And we had very little, pushback from students. Could there be a little bit more this fall? Possibly, only in the sense that at my school, instead of there being 600 to 700 students coming back, there are all but 60, and our school has 2,500. So we have a lot more students coming back, which means the potential for a little bit more pushback than when you only had about a third of that number in the spring. But I think our administration and our counseling team, in terms of supporting administration, will make it part of the expectations that are announced on the first day. I'm sure that our school is very strong on a lot of video stuff for just kind of setting the tone for the year in most expectations. Here's where you find the cafeteria, this kind of stuff. And so I'm sure the mask use will be part of that. And we'll just move from there.
I'd like to add on to what Chuck said. I mean, we also really did not have trouble this whole last school year with students being compliant. I mean, sure, they needed reminders like pull it above your nose, right? But not defiance. I think one, adults modeling it and show, like, them seeing all the adults in the building wearing their masks appropriately is helpful. I also think students know what it's like now to not go to school. And so the idea of like March 2020, when they came to school on Friday and didn't come back to school, is a very real thing. And a lot of kids missed school. They missed the routine. They might not have missed the academics, but they missed the social component. And so I think the students, at least in our school, were just really grateful to be back, even with all of the extra things that had to go on to keep them safe last school year. They were just excited to be back. So wearing masks, if it allowed them to get back into the building to what was normal, they were excited to do so.
And so I would just say I agree with what Sarah and Chuck said. We were fortunate to be in school starting in August last year. So we were in person the whole year. We had probably 10 to 15% of our students virtual. But it surprised me that, especially in the younger students, the kindergarten, first graders, second graders, they were fine with the masks. They were very good about keeping them on their faces correctly. We had to bring several masks for mask changes during the school day, but other than that, they did very well. And I would say that we have kindergarten through 8th grade, so we have middle school and elementary school. And as Chuck pointed out, there is some youthful exuberance at testing the rules in middle school, but they all did very well.
And will that, Mike, will that be the same procedure this year? They'll all be wearing masks?
Right. So what Chuck and Sarah talked about that Wake County is doing, we're doing the exact same thing. So masks inside for all students. We only have very few students who are vaccinated, only going up to middle school, but we are, and the adults as well. So vaccinated or unvaccinated, the faculty and staff, as well as the students, are masked inside. And again, as Sarah said, when they go out to recess, they can remove their masks, or the masks are optional outside.
Okay. One thing that we did not mention at the beginning that I believe, meant to, Mary Ann, is that if people have questions that you would like to ask, that you think of in the midst of, as we're going through the ones that were presented ahead of time, you can submit them in the chat room. Write them in there, and then Mary Ann will kind of coordinate those, and we'll go over those after we finish the ones that were submitted before. Okay, the next topic is safety. And one of the questions is, since we know the Delta variant is more harmful, and this, I'm not sure we know it's more harmful to children, but it's more contagious is what we know, much more readily contagious, and is impacting children more, it seems, than the original variant. Are all of the same protocols being used as last year as far as 6 feet distancing, no large gatherings, etc.? So, Sarah, you want to start again?
Sure. So Chuck alluded to this idea of Plan B and Plan A, which is kind of just educator speak for what the state had with regard to guidelines. Wake County is operating under Plan A, which according to the state means that we are to do our very best to keep at least 3 feet between students whenever we can, but we are not required to keep any 6 feet of distance, or really, we can't guarantee that there's going to be any distance, but we are to keep at least 3 feet whenever possible is the exact wording, I believe. So that being said, wherever possible, we are going to keep students apart as much as we can and safely distance in the classroom, in the hallways, at lunch, at recess, on the bus, and so on.
Anyone else? Mike, for the Franciscan school?
That's the same thing. I mean, as Sarah pointed out, the guidance from the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, their strong schools toolkit, which we use as well in the Diocese of Raleigh, has a lot of shoulds and coulds in it. And one of the things that they say, one of the intentions of the state, and I think the CDC, is that as many children as possible get back to in-person learning for this year. And that may mean that as best you can to stay 3 feet distance within the classroom. But that's the guidance right now, is 3 feet. And at the end of last year, the guidance went from 6 to 3. If you went from Plan B to Plan A, which is what we did at the end of the school year.
Okay, then one of the questions was, do you know, do you, I don't know if you know, but does the Wake County Public School System and the Franciscan School, do you know how many of your teachers are vaccinated? That was one of the questions. Michael, you're on my big screen, so I'll go to you first.
It's probably easier for me because we have a set number of faculty and staff rather than Wake County. But yes, we know, and the vast majority of our faculty and staff are vaccinated.
Chuck, it's your turn. Do you happen to know, or do you know if they're asking about that, or?
Yeah, that's one I'll kick to Sarah, because that's really administrative. I will say that as someone who is not in administration, I don't really have any particular knowledge about it.
We have not asked, and I don't believe we are encouraged to ask staff if they are vaccinated. Obviously, if people talk about it, we can think that they are. We were required that if staff needed time to go get a vaccine, that we were to cover them. They weren't required to take a leave to go get vaccinated. So in some cases, we might suspect that people are vaccinated, but in terms of asking and knowing for sure, I mean, that's private health information that we're not asking about at this time.
Right. I mean,
What I can say, Pam, as someone who's been vaccinated, is that the way in which I became vaccinated was that Wake County school system worked with the folks at Wake Med to provide a number of vaccination kind of opportunities back in the spring, in February and March. And, you know, I was at one such event at Southeast Raleigh High School where, you know, there were hundreds of folks all outside and socially distant and all that. But I mean, they churned people through. And you know, I was at one of many such events. And I definitely think there was a strong feeling among the county school employees that we needed to get vaccinated to help us get to where we want to be as a school system with kids. So, I mean, no, I don't have numbers, but experientially, it does seem to me like there was a push for folks to get vaccinated because we realized that was the best best way we had of making sure that we could operate safely in the traditional school environment.
And Pam,
And
if you
part
don't
of this-
mind, I'll interject.
As a
I'm a
pediatric nurse, yes.
I'm retired, yeah, but definitely HIPAA laws would prevent schools from even asking. So they're adults, it's their choice, and it's a private matter. I also want to just ask folks if they do want to ask other questions to direct them to me in the chat box. And we did have one, before we get too far away from it, it's connected to your first questions about masks. And I thought about it, having worked in schools as a nurse, lunchroom, what's that going to look like? You know, when kids have to go to lunch, it's going to be difficult.
I'll just speak up. All last year, we were eating lunch in the classrooms and outside as much as possible and as much as the weather permitted. This year, because part of that reason was because we were using the cafeteria as a classroom. But this year, we're using our cafeteria as a cafeteria, but we're only doing half capacity. So everyone will be spread out. So we'll alternate back and forth during the lunch period. So we typically have, for instance, our 5th and 7th graders eat together. So 5th grade will be in the cafeteria one day and 7th grade will eat outside or in the classrooms, and they'll reverse it the next day. So everyone will get a chance to eat in the cafeteria, but it won't be as crowded as it normally would be.
At the high school level, when we came back to school in February, students were eating in classrooms because, well, first of all, because there was a low number of students who were in school as opposed to being on virtual academy, and so it was possible to have only 2 or 3 students in a classroom with a teacher at lunch. But also because at that time, students were not eligible to be vaccinated. All high school students are able to be vaccinated at this point. And so by the end of last school year, we were moving toward in fact, I think it happened in April, May, when we moved to Plan A, where students were in the cafeteria. It's my understanding that will be the case. As Mike was saying about the Francis School, I wouldn't be at all surprised. I return to school later this week. I wouldn't be at all surprised to find out that there's been some adjustments to the cafeteria schedule so that there won't be the volume of students who were in the cafeteria at one time that there would have been before March 2020. But I think it's probably going to be students in the cafeteria. I would be very surprised if it were students in the classroom. With the number of students we have coming back.
Okay.
So I'll add on to that. I mean, we ate lunch in the cafeteria all last year. We were able to spread kids out 6 feet apart. We're having kids eat lunch in the cafeteria again. One thing I will say is that there are assigned seats in the cafeteria. We had them last year. We are having them again this year, and that is to limit who people are around, right? Like if you're eating lunch every day with different set of people, you might have more exposure that way. So to limit who is around, and obviously we're gonna continue having as much space as we can between students. And Chuck, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe high schoolers have the option to go eat lunch off campus, correct?
Juniors and seniors.
Okay, so some of their students might be eating lunch off campus.
Part of the question then, it stemmed from this idea of keeping the students and the staff safe. So part of the question is, what do you need from parents? What can parents be doing to help keep the students safe? Chuck, we'll start your turn.
Sure. I guess, I think some of the other questions later on will probably address emotional safety. So I'll stay away from that for right now. Right now, I'll just interpret that as physical safety. And so, not to be too much of a zealot about it, but the number one thing is be vaccinated. Unless as an adult, unless you have a physical condition that prevents you from being vaccinated, the number one thing you can do to keep you and your family safe is to become vaccinated. For the kids, it's different because it depends on the grade level. Elementary kids are not eligible yet to be vaccinated. Middle school kids depends on the grade level. High school kids are the only level where the entire level is in the realm right now where they can be vaccinated. And so I would say for high school kids, the same thing applies for high school kids as applies to adults. If you are eligible to be vaccinated and you don't have an existing health condition that prevents it, then I feel like it's a civic and a personal responsibility to get vaccinated. So that's step one. Step two, I would say, would be, as Sarah was getting at a little bit ago with the example in the cafeteria, trying to keep your contacts as limited as you can within the environment. And so that's difficult to do when you're back in school and you're at a school that has anywhere from 400 at the elementary level to a couple thousand at the high school level, to try to keep those contacts limited. Since there's probably not a lot of control that an individual student has over, outside of the cafeteria example that was used, I think then it's important to think about the times outside of school, because those are more under your control. And so, as we get in this Delta variant land, I'm definitely watching the number of times that I'm out in large groups, especially in groups that I don't know. I'm trying to keep that to as close to zero as I can. I know it's frustrating. I know we would like to be back to normal with that kind of exposure and doing whatever we want. But if our predominant goal is how to keep ourselves and our families safe in school, I think we have to recognize that a big chunk of that rests with what we're doing outside of school, and the number of contacts and risks that we pose through the various ways that we interact in the part of the day that is not at school. So that's where I would start.
Sarah, how about for the elementary?
So I'm going to add on, I guess, along Chuck's idea. I definitely think modeling, especially for elementary school kids, what safety looks like is helpful. Teaching your kids how to wash their hands appropriately, encouraging the use of hand sanitizer, teaching your child how to wear masks and when to wear masks and when to change masks, and helping students see like what your behavior is. What are you thinking about as you go around these different places in your own life, and who are you choosing to interact with? And like I said, masks are optional outside. Do you want your child wearing a mask outside? Because if you do, you probably should tell your child, and maybe also tell their teacher, so their teacher can kind of reinforce that and encourage that at school, just to help keep students safe. I think part of it is just having conversations about it, and not to make kids feel scared, but like, this is the part we control, right? We control our own behavior. That's the only piece of this that we can control. And so empowering students to make safe choices.
Michael, do you have any additional comments?
Well, I think that the parents can help with all the things that Sarah and Chuck talked about. Also, just make sure that despite what anyone believes, that a lot of people are affected if your child comes to school sick. And so, err on the side of caution if your child is sick, because almost every symptom is crossing with some other disease, as far as asthma and allergies and colds and flu and everything else. So if there's any doubt, please leave them home and take care of them at home for a day or two. And the teachers and the administration will make sure they get what they need to be successful, but it's better to stay at home and err on the side of caution.
Agreed. Well said, Mike.
Yes. That's always an issue, isn't it? Even before COVID, that was an issue. And I think we've kind of addressed this in the responses you gave, but the question was about keeping the very youngest of our students safe when the vaccine is probably several months away for them. So I think is there any other point that would be made for the younger ones? I think you've addressed that really in your other part of your answer. Any other thoughts or something I'm missing there? This was an interesting question. Oh, Michael, do you have something?
No, I was just going to repeat again that, as Sarah said, the kids were very good last year. I think that they'll be good this year. And again, just modeling that behavior.
This question is, will testing be available on site at school if a child is exhibiting symptoms of COVID-19? Or will you just be sending them home, I guess, is the alternative question, as opposed to having testing occurring right on site? Chuck, I see you've unmuted.
Yeah. I don't think testing in the literal sense of having like a rapid COVID test or that kind of thing. What we did have in the spring, and what I'm sure we will have again in the fall, although it may look a little bit different, is the temperature gauges that we had them at St. Francis too briefly during the period where we were just starting to come back to mass. We have those, and I'm sure they will be used. In the spring, when we came back to school in February, it was a very methodical thing where literally an administrator and counselor team was in 6 different spots in the school with one of those, and every kid every day had their temperature checked. That switched as we moved from Plan B to Plan A by the end of last year. That wasn't being required in that way, but we do have those thermometers, and I'm sure that if a student were complaining, I don't mean to use complaining in the sense not like whining complaining, but had a physical complaint of not feeling well, that the first thing that we would do would be to check temperature, since fever often is symptom associated, and we have the tool. But that's about the only thing, though, that I think in terms of testing, like if the questioner meant like the ability to do a rapid COVID test at school, not that I'm aware of.
Pam, the question did come up. What will the schools do if there is a positive test among the students? Will the families all be notified?
So I don't know, the Franciscan school might operate differently here. To answer the first question, I know that is one of the recommendations from the state, is that school systems try to figure out a way to do some sort of testing of the population, I think, to just get an idea as to how many people are sick. But at this point, I have not heard of any plans for Wake County to implement testing in that sense. The other piece was, remind me again, I totally lost my train of thought. Oh, about being notified. Got it. So people are notified if they are what is found to be a close contact of somebody who tested positive. In the Wake County school system, there is an online website that tracks by day, by school, whether it was a staff or student, and whether there was a case. And it also indicates whether there was a link to the community or a household, and then if it's also somehow tied to a cluster. So that is updated every day during Monday through Friday, so that information is public knowledge. But we do not notify people unless they are directly affected.
So, at the Franciscan school, what we did last year is if somebody tested positive, we were in cohorts at that time, we would tell the people in the cohort this happened, and then we would, if there was a close contact, we would let them know whether they had to quarantine as well. right? And so there are times where we had a whole cohort quarantine, but typically, especially, out of school, we found out somebody tested positive on one of our students' teams, they would quarantine. It wouldn't affect anything in the school unless somebody else from the school was on the same team. But it worked fairly well. I was the one who notified the cohort or the students or the grade at times when we had a positive test on a student or a faculty member, and we dealt with it as best we could. Again, we're erring on the side of safety for everyone.
Okay, the next is still in this whole idea of safety. The next question, I did send this to you all ahead of time, is it's a little complicated process. Hopefully you understand it a little better than I do. It is, what, if any, processes exist to help drive decision points? And what they meant by this is they're like a threshold for transmission of disease that then shifts the decisions of how you're going to handle school. And then they wondered also if vaccination of children under 12, when that ultimately comes, would that then alter how school, maybe you wouldn't be in plan A anymore. There'd be a different way that school could be handled. Anybody got any thoughts about that?
Well, I think we did that last year. I mean, we started off in Plan B last year in August and went essentially through Easter. We were Plan B through Easter and then went to Plan A. And so it depends on, the advice from the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, who takes their lead from the CDC. Also, the Wake County Public Health Department was very good. We have a specific person at the health department we spoke to about any positive cases or any questions we had. I can't say enough about the Wake County Health Department. They did such an amazing job with us, and we followed their advice. And so we're looking at the experts' advice from the North Carolina Health and Human Services, as well as the Wake County Health Department. We had a task force of physicians and others who had knowledge of the virus and its implications. And so I think it's just something that you have to look at the cases and everything else as you go through the year and make changes. If the cases drop, do we make changes? It depends on the guidance, but I think in-person instruction is very important, and the best ways to do that while keeping people safe is what we'll move to if we can.
Chuck or Sarah? Sarah?
I mean, our process is similar to what Mr. Watson was describing, in the sense of, if we have a positive case or a known exposure, we report it to Wake County Public School System has a health team. So we report it to them, and then they're kind of the liaison to the Wake County Health Department. So the school's never making a decision, like we're not making the decision on our own, like it's in consultation with whatever the medical health professionals are telling us to do. I mean, that being said, I think the Wake County Public School System has not nailed down specific metrics and tied that to, if this, then this happens. It is, as Mr. Watson said, it's fluid, right? Like, because what happens one week might be different from the next week, and you're just kind of adapting. And I think most people really want their kids back in school. And so and have it, and it's like, how do we have the most kids back in school and keep them safe, knowing that there's an element of, it's a give and take in order to keep that moving forward.
I think that's part of the issue, isn't it? That there's always an unknown. We don't know this, so you can't really make threshold points, because that may not be the case in a couple months or weeks, whatever, because it just keeps changing what we're learning.
And it might vary like school to school, right? Like different class sizes, different percentages of population, different locations within a county as big as ours. So I think sometimes it's hard to say, give it clear, this is the threshold piece.
Right. Another question was, do you have a backup plan if COVID spreads throughout the system? That would be disastrous. I felt like maybe the question really was based on the initial experiences that all the schools had when suddenly school wasn't just out for a couple days, but now was out for months. And everybody was really trying to figure out what to do and how to do it at that very beginning point. Is there now a plan that if that were to happen again, that would be more systematic than it was initially? Chuck?
Well, I actually was talking with Marianne a little bit about that when we were just getting things going tonight. And one of the things that I think has come out of the pandemic is that we have more tools now for engagement with families, students, through methods like Google Meet, Zoom, and other applications where we can communicate on a virtual level, even if not face to face. I would not go on record as saying that it's preferable to be virtual. I don't think that's true. But I think in situations where health and safety are an issue and a threshold does move to a place where we can't be in person, I think we can use those virtual tools to try to keep the learning going during that time. I think, ideally we want students in the physical school. That's the best thing. But it's good now that we've everyone, teachers, administrators, counselors, students, parents, the community, now has been exposed to the tools that can be used in virtual supplementary roles for that in-person experience, so that if we ever have to do it, we can do it.
And I'll just add from the Wake County perspective, this year, all students are going to have a device. So I know the shift from in-person school to online school was hard because not every kid had a device, not every family had access to the internet. And it took a while for schools to mobilize and get their devices that they did have in the hands of families, and then the school system to supplement and order and reorder and get those out. And so Wake County has ordered a bunch of devices. They're coming to schools, and every student will have a Chromebook in his or her hands at some point to start the school year, which does make, if we were ever to have to make a giant shift of schools closed in the physical building and everyone had to learn at home, that should make it a little bit easier in the transition than it was initially.
Michael, do you have anything to add?
I would just agree with what they say. We have devices for our students if they need them. And we're 3rd through 8th grade, we're 1-to-1 with Chromebooks. And so, we have the ability to make that switch as well.
Okay,
Pam, I have a
Chuck.
question.
Okay, go, Farrell.
Well, I'd like to, just so we don't drop it. Chuck, a little while ago, parked an observation. He divided physical safety, and I assume he was talking about social and emotional distress and issues that are going to arise and that have arisen from the disruption caused by COVID. So I'd like to hear all three panelists talk about this in 2 parts. One, what's their sense of the emotional and emotional and morale issues facing students? And similarly, what are the emotional and morale issues facing teachers and staff? There's been a lot of, on the student side, there's been a lot of concern about how many or how few students showed up for kindergarten last year, for instance. And there's also been a lot of speculation about the stress of COVID and the virtual schooling. We may lose experienced teachers So I know that's packing several issues into one question there, but if you could talk about students and talk about teachers, that would be good.
And that's right where that was the very next, you saw my notes. It's emotional care and counseling. And one particular registrant asked, because she has a granddaughter who's going to be a sophomore now and never was in a high school building as a freshman. And what are some things that she can do to encourage her granddaughter and, you know, console her as well if any anxieties she might have. And so it was really true even for some of the children last year where the parents chose for them to be totally virtual. But like at the Franciscan school, Mike, the class was there meeting. And so that child coming back in this year has sort of missed a year of history, live history with that class. And so how to deal with all those. Chuck, as counselor, you tell us what to do here.
Well, I'll give some ideas. I won't tell people what to do, but actually, I will violate that for a second. I will tell you to go to one place. I have one resource that could be very helpful. Wake County, last year, the school system contracted with Virtual Parent Summit. The email address is virtualparentsummit, that's all one word, .com. And so someone can put it in the chat. That'd be great. And that way everyone can grab it. It's a set of videos from experts. Thank you. Experts in working with children. And so a number of licensed professional counselors, social workers, mental health folks. And the topics that they cover are kind of common sense, but very well structured and organized. Some of the topics include motivation and engagement, finding balance, resources and self-care, dealing with anxiety, for parents, coaching versus catching. And so I would encourage any parent or grandparent or interested adult who has a little bit of time. These videos tend to be between a half hour and 45 minutes long. I watched all of them in the spring and June at the end of the school year so that I could, I don't like offering resources without having tried them myself. And so I watched them to make sure that they had decent material in them. And I feel like they really do. And they help the person who's watching it breathe a little bit and get some strategies for how to best work with their students, whether the students are anxious or frustrated or depressed or whatever. It doesn't necessarily make the person an expert in mental health, but it does work with coping and some of the very basic foundational pieces that are necessary. A little bit later on, I'm going to get to that very specific question that you asked about the high school sophomore. I promise you I won't let that drop, but I feel like for right now, I want the three of us to talk about kind of the broader question of emotionally returning to school. I think, there are a lot of challenges. Like Mike, I also was in school from last August on, and that's because I'm a counselor. And so counselors, we have our own offices complete with doors. And so I was able to come back to school at the very start of the school year because I was at very low risk of any danger because I was not interacting with anyone other than my computer. But teachers were at home, as were their students. And so when the school system returned in February, well, actually, I think at the elementary levels, it was in November, but, returned whenever we returned. There were a lot of people who were just kind of disoriented for a bit about just trying to remember kind of the basics and the rudiments of the structure that they hadn't experienced for at least 6 months. And I think trying to get back to basics and structure in terms of, okay, it's a school night, you ought to be in bed by whatever time you and your child agree is bedtime on a school night. Making sure that they get up at a reasonable time, that they've had their breakfast. I know all of that sounds super basic, but it's the first thing that we forget about when we're stressed. And those are the kinds of things that have impact the rest of the day. If a kid comes to school and they're sleep deprived, or they haven't had breakfast properly, then it really sets the stage for all of the other things that come into play. So kind of those basics and just getting back into the rhythm of this is what a school day at school is like, which is very different from a school day at home in your bedroom. So those basics, I think, help a lot. And then just reaching out, from what can a parent do? I think reaching out to their child's teachers and counselor early on to establish connections and ties. At the very beginning of a school year, any school year, not just this one with COVID, but any school year, when the parent does reach out to the teachers or to the counselor, the teachers and the counselor are going to say, I'm glad you reached out to us. You're going to need to give me a little bit of time because we're adjusting into our year with our caseloads, and it does take a little bit of time. But for me personally, I always tell parents that I'm back in touch with them within 48 hours, whether it's a phone call, whether it's an email, however they reach out to me. If they don't hear from me within 48 hours, something's wrong. That it means either it went to a bad email address, which sometimes happens, or there's some sort of unusual circumstance. But I try to respond very quickly to every parent that is reaching out to me. So, reach out to us. We're there to help you and your families, and we'll do the very best we can.
Michael, do you or Sarah have anything you want to add? No.
So I mean, the question was about the sense of morale for students and for staff. I can't speak for everybody in education. I can talk about what my staff seemed to be like at the end of last year, and they were really ready for summer vacation. Last year for me was exhausting. I think some of that was the extent of the uncertainty, having never lived it, not knowing, are we in person? Are we in cohorts? When are we going back? Oh, are we virtual? And planning, and also knowing that within your building, you have kind of two separate schedules, two groups of people, and managing that. Like you have the in-person group of kids, but you have virtual students as well. And there was just a lot of moving pieces last year. And I think couple that with your own sense of safety and just, what's going on. People were exhausted. I think people are going to come into this year feeling much more refreshed after their vacations, but also knowing that they've done it and knowing we're all starting at the same point. Like we're largely in the building. My school doesn't have very many students. I have chosen virtual academy. So the bulk of our kids are in the building, and we're all on the same schedule. And I think that will help staff feel connected to each other again, because I do think last year there was an element of isolation from staff in the sense of, because they started the year in their own, either at home or they'd come to their classroom and work in their classroom. And the whole point was to limit our interactions. To keep people safe, but I think people are seeking more connections now. With regard to students, I didn't really interact with students that talked a whole lot about being scared about coming to school. And I don't know if that's because they didn't feel comfortable telling me about it. I don't know if they didn't have the words for it. I also think it's a little different with young children because they haven't had like 9 years of school looking this way, like the kindergartners that are now second graders. I mean, they went out, they didn't have a full year of kindergarten, and then they had last year, and then they're going to have this year, and every year's looked a little different. So in some ways, I feel like it's been harder on the adults because we have in our mind what school should look like, and these kids are missing things, but I don't really know that the kids, especially the really young ones, have that perception because they haven't lived it. Now, the older kids in elementary school, I definitely think verbalized, and they told me like, I missed school. I couldn't wait to come back. Like this was the best day ever. And so, I mean, I think the student morale for elementary school, they feel great just being in school and getting to play with their friends on the playground and just have that interaction. I mean, the kids seemed thrilled to be back in the building.
Yeah, I would agree with what Sarah said. I also just, it was tough last year being cohorts. And so, essentially you're dividing into 4 classrooms. You're dividing first grade into 4 classrooms and they don't get to interact with each other. So there's people who had friends that they didn't get to see all year, except, from a distance. And I think when we moved to Plan A at the end of the year and kids could go outside and take their masks off and see each other and interact more, that was a great moment. And I think it really inspired all our teachers as well. I had teaching assistants and teachers coming in from the playground, talking about how happy the kids were to see each other smiling because their masks were off and they could see each other's faces now. And I think that the year ended well for teachers. They were exhausted, as Sarah said, but they were looking forward to coming back to a more normal situation this year. And I think we're going to have that. It's going to be more normal. It's not going to be normal, but it's going to be more normal than it was at the beginning of last year, certainly.
Chuck?
Pam, I think the last thing I would say on that particular question is one thing that one of our mottos that we really pursued last year was grace, patience, and flexibility as bywords to follow, and at the beginning of the year, they felt kind of like buzzwords, but by the end of the year, we really had lived into them because we needed all 3 of those all year long to be able to make it through the year. And I don't think that that's really changed. Maybe the parameters of COVID have changed and then changed back depending on things, but the need for those 3 things is, I think, just as great as ever. And so I would say to parents and families, recognize that everyone is doing the best that they can. And when I say that, I'm not saying it like recognize that your teachers and administrators and counselors are doing the best that they can. What I'm saying is recognize that you and your children are doing the best that you can. Give yourself some grace and some flexibility because we're not done with the pandemic yet. And just, kind of the day-to-day living choices that we have to make over and over again because of where we are exert some stress on our lives. And so if we can be flexible and gracious with ourselves first, then we will be successful or more likely to be successful in being flexible and gracious with others. So please extend that to yourself first. That's the most important thing, the self-care.
Okay, now we're going to switch to learning losses perhaps that have occurred because of all of the situations through the last 16 months. So this first question is, how much, if any, makeup work must be done at the beginning of the school year? What are some of the strategies for dealing with children's varied starting points this year? Sarah, I'll start with you. You have the little people. Oh, you have something, Chuck? Go ahead if you're on.
No, I was just going to say this is going to be a very different answer from Sarah and me. So now I'll kick it to Sarah.
Okay.
So in some ways, it's no different than any other year in the sense of COVID or not COVID, our students come into the building with a wide range of strengths and areas for growth. And so part of being a teacher or support staff in our building, right, is determining where students are and then providing them the supports that they need or the acceleration that they need. And so that's something teachers and educators are used to doing anyway. And so in some ways it's not any different. You might have cohorts of kids that maybe didn't get as much practice in a particular skill, but you're going to see that and then know that you need to adjust accordingly. I mean, looking at last school year, Wake County has some pacing for curriculum. And so one of the things that they did over the summer was they created a bridge curriculum, recognizing that after March of 2020, there were some places, some targeted skills that students didn't probably practice as much as they would have or have gotten exposed to the way that they would have had they been in the building. And so that was added so that there was additional support for the students, recognizing that they might have not gotten the exposure they ordinarily would have. But like I said, I really just think that's what educators do. We learn our students and then we provide the resources they need to be successful.
Mike, any comments for you?
The reason why I said it would probably be different for Sarah or for me is that, at the elementary school level, as she was saying, students are kind of across the grade level building year to year to year. At the high school level, classes are discrete classes. And even in like English or math, where you might say, well, doesn't English 3 build on English 2? Well, in different ways. And so essentially we look at each class and whether a student has succeeded or not succeeded in mastering the material in that discrete class. And so what I do as a counselor is I take a look at, is the class that a student passed or failed a core class that is English, math, science, social studies required for graduation, or an elective class? And if it's an elective class and the student didn't pass it, okay, well, that's the past. It's an elective, it's not required, and so we move on. If it's a core class and the student didn't pass it, then we have an application, a program called Grad Point that students use to complete the credit in that class. And students complete the credit later on in their high school career. And they have to do that for any core class that they didn't pass the first time around, unless for some reason the parent wants them to be in the classroom again in that subject. So that's how it's done at the high school level. We did have extended summer learning days this summer. I think that was also done at elementary. I'm not sure. That's not I should let Sarah talk about that. But at the high school level, we did have extended learning days this summer where students were eligible to do. And when I say that, I don't mean summer school necessarily. The purpose of the extended learning days was to help bridge the students' experience from last year to this year. And so it was designed more, at least as much with the emotional intent of students interacting with teachers, being in the physical school building and that kind of thing, getting ready for the fall, as it was with any credit recovery of something that they might not have passed in the spring. But that was definitely a choice that a student and their family were making. It was not a requirement from the school system. So not every student took advantage of it, but it was something that was available. So the question, how much makeup work do they have to do at the beginning of the school year at the high school level? It could be none, and it could be some in the core classes, but that's not any different from any regular year. That's not something that is COVID specific.
Mike,
I would agree, but I also want to point out to everyone again, last year was a tough year across the country. And so we have to kind of recalibrate where we are and what our expectations are. And again, we were in classes, but they were totally different from last August until last June. And one of the conversations I've had with our faculty is you need to realize that your kids are not going to be, your incoming third graders are not going to be at what they would have been 2 years ago in 2019 when they came in August. And so we have to understand that and kind of reset the beginning point and work towards getting them back to where we want them to be. But this is a worldwide, not just nationwide issue, and it has affected kids across the world. And so we have to keep in mind that, it's not on an individual basis. We need to get this kid reading level back up to where it was. It's going to be kind of a school-wide or district-wide effort to get everyone back to where we were, because everyone has lost over this time something.
I agree, Mike. And I would also say that goes on even through past 12th grade. I mean, colleges are going to be dealing with, for the next several years, groups of students who are not at what college students normally are at because of the experience that they had in high school.
I mean, I had a college freshman last year, so she had the advantage of graduating in 2020 from high school and not having prom or real graduation, and then going through her freshman year in and out and virtual, and it's not a great experience. I mean, we talk about kindergartner through fifth graders being virtual. It's tough for high school and college kids to be virtual too.
But I also would like to say, I think, one, we're fortunate that we even have school, because to Mr. Watson's point, we enrolled students from Mexico who did not have school during like literally no school for over a year. So the fact that we are in a country that is figuring out how to make education work is wonderful. But also, I think our students are developing skills we just might not know yet. For instance, we have kindergartners who are really adept at using technology in ways our kindergarten teachers never would have ever tried before in their classrooms. And so maybe we don't see it yet, but I think we're having groups of kids that are way more flexible or resilient comes to mind. And those are life skills that are not able to be easily quantified.
100% agree with what Sarah just said. There's so many new skills that they have and different ways of looking at things. So it's the silver lining.
One of the other parts of this was, how are community education and tutorial resources shared with parents and students? So if someone needs additional help, I think, Chuck, you answered that a little bit with the high school issue, but how is that made known to parents and to students? What's available?
So at our school, on our student services website, we have links to resources that parents can access. When I'm speaking with the student, there are some go-tos. For example, Khan Academy is a go-to that I use frequently with math and science. So yeah, we have on our website some resources. We have to be careful on that because Wake County has very clear guidelines in terms of not having conflicts of interest with promoting particular for-profit enterprises. And so whenever I do make a resource referral, it's to a nonprofit resource. But yeah, that's how we do it.
Mike, how about at the Franciscan school?
We have, the online resources through our RenWeb system, as well as Google Classroom that we provide. But our teachers are also available for parents to connect with. We also are fortunate, especially for a parochial school, to have 2 educational resource teachers and a full-time counselor. And so we have the ability to coordinate with the teacher in the classroom for students who need additional help, as well as coordinating with parents to answer their concerns. And we spent a lot of time last year, personally I did as well, answering individual emails from parents about concerns, and that's what we do. I mean, that's what Sarah does, it's what Chuck, I'm sure, does as a counselor, and it's what we do as part of the administrative roles that we have.
I mean, I think in terms of resources, the best thing, if people need resources, is to ask for them, because we don't know if people need help unless there's a conversation that gives us a glimmer or somebody directly says it. And there definitely are groups and things we can refer people to give them the help that they need. So if you're struggling, if your student is struggling, just reach out. I mean, we care about the whole child and about students' families, and we want to help however we can.
Okay, so Sarah, I'll go with you on this, because this question is asking that, is there an option to have online classes for children under 12 because there's not a vaccine available? Now, that is through the Wake County Public School System. They already have had that opportunity, correct, to choose. I lost Mike. That's what I wanted to ask, if there's any option. Well, I'll come back when he returns. on that.
Pam,
This
hey, Pam, I was gonna say the diocese has opened a virtual academy,
Oh, there
but
you
Mike is back now, so he can answer that.
go. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I had to go refill my water glass. Yes, as Heidi said, the Diocese of Raleigh has established a virtual academy. I will say that we haven't had many of our parents choose that option. And so I think for all the reasons that Chuck mentioned earlier, the socio-emotional reasons, and even the CDC recognizes that it's better for the kids to be in person, right? And for more than just the academic part, for the social part, the emotional part. And that's another thing we've learned from this experience. It's not just about the academics, it's about the whole child, as Sarah just mentioned, and it's not easily ignored, the social part and the emotional part, because it really has an impact.
There's one final question from the chat that I have that might fit well here, Pam.
Okay.
Have the enrollment numbers changed going into this fall? If so, how? And to what do you attribute this to?
Who wants to start? Sarah, you want to start? Just be the younger students.
I mean, I can start, and I don't know the numbers for the school system. I do think we live in a place where there are lots of choices for families, whether that's parochial schools or charter schools or homeschool support. So I do think that over time, more people are choosing options other than the public school system. What that looks like across the county, I can't tell you what the exact numbers are.
Have you experienced much change at your school?
So the answer to that would be yes. I've been at my school 5 full school years, and we are probably down 100-ish kids. And it's interesting because someone alluded to this before about how we anticipated kindergarten numbers to be down last school year, but we were anticipating them to go back up with this school year. And for my personal school, we have not seen the jump in kindergarten numbers I would have expected. So I don't really know what to attribute that to. I will say I do know that there were people last year who made choices. Wake County started off the school year not in school. And I know that there were families who left our school to go to a school where there was in-person instruction from day one, because that was what they needed for their family and for their child. And so I know some of those people have come back to our school, and some of them haven't. And I don't know what it looks like for Chuck.
So at Enlo's a magnet high school, and so we draw kids from across the county, kids and families from across the county. The number that I know of that's in our student body for this year is 2,500, which is higher than last year. It's lower than it was a few years ago, but I mean, it's not. We have variation, so there's nothing particularly significant about that. What will be more significant is every year the schools do what's called a 10-day head count, and that is where we see, 2,500 is the number of kids that have schedules in the system. Whether those 2,500 students actually come to school is the question. And we will know that by mid-September when the 10-day head count is finished. I don't know. I'll be curious to see how that all plays out. I do think, though, like Sarah said, there's a lot of enthusiasm for kids to come back into the schools after a year being at home. I'd be surprised if we saw huge numbers of kids not being in school.
Mike, how about for the Franciscan school?
We've got some students who came from public school last year, but we're about at our normal amount of enrollments. We're a school of about 650 students, and we were a little lower last year at 630, but we're 650, and we've met our enrollment goals. But I think the parents are making their decisions on, as Sarah said, where their family is best situated. So
this is the last question I have from our questions that were given ahead of time, and this is about employment.
Pam, this
Yes.
is Carol. Let me interrupt you again.
Oh, yes, okay.
Mary Ann, I just put a link in chat for you. I couldn't find a way to do it to everyone. It's an article from Education NC on school enrollments and increases in homeschooling and all of that. And it has a lot of links to data. So it's about the state as a whole, not just Wake County, but it gives you a good information. So if you could send it to everyone, Mary Ann, that would be great. Sorry, Pam. Thank you.
That's okay. That's all right. That's a good resource to share. So this question is about employment, and it's asking if there are teacher, staff, counselor vacancies at this point in time, and if so, are they being filled by substitutes, or are class sizes increasing, or are we hiring non-licensed personnel, or are there being hiring retention incentives being used? How is it being addressed? Anybody know?
I'm laughing because there's a whole lot of things in that one question, and I'm not exactly sure where to begin. To answer the question, there are openings across Wake County, and there are a lot of them. A number of them are in virtual academy positions where people are teaching online to a group of students whose families have selected that for them this school year. There is a shortage of people who are entering and staying in special education, and particularly at the most recent school board meeting last week. They were discussing, and I believe they passed an incentive, financial incentive signing bonus for people to enter special education and stay for a period of time with Wake County. I don't know the numbers again, but it's not hard to find that there is a teaching shortage in the state of North Carolina. We simply do not have young people turning into education majors and then staying here in the state to fill the number of people who are retiring. And so Wake County is doing looking at partnerships and does have some programs to try and encourage high schoolers to become educators and actually come back into Wake County as teachers. But there definitely is a shortage of educators. We're trying to fill positions. Obviously, we want qualified people in order to do the job. But sometimes that pool gets shallow and you can't hire people that aren't in the pool.
I would say that as much like Sarah just said, there is a shortage of teachers. We've had some openings and we've had candidates, and we filled most of the openings we have. We just had a new opening last week that we're trying to address. All of our teachers at different private schools and different parochial, or not parochial schools, different private schools are different, but in the Diocese of Raleigh, all of our teachers are licensed or undergoing the licensure process through DPI. So we have had some openings. We've hired licensed teachers, and Sarah mentioned talking about Wake County or the state encouraging high schoolers to choose education. I really wish the state would continue with their Troops to Classrooms program that they had in place before. That's kind of ended now, because I think there's a lot of talented people in the military who have leadership experience, but also experience leading small teams and educating those teams. And I think it's a great resource for schools to maybe, as someone who is a lateral entry teacher, it's a great resource to tap into to find, you know, very qualified teachers if we give them the opportunity to get licensed.
So I was going to leave this question to our two admins because it really is more of an administrative question. The one part of it I will address is in part because of the federal funding that came through the coronavirus. There are additional counselor positions that have opened in Wake County this year, which is wonderful. Our school, at my school, we will have six counselors again for the first time in 5 years. And it makes a big difference because I had a caseload of more than 500 kids last year. This year, it'll be a little over 400. It does make a big difference in my ability to be present for my kids and their families, to not have as many to be present for. So yeah, there you go.
All right, as I said, I have finished to the best of my knowledge here on the questions that were submitted, compiling them together. So Marianne, did anyone else have any questions for us through the chat?
Nope, I think we've covered them all.
I do want to jump in for just a quick second because I purposely kicked a question to later and I want to come back and make sure that I addressed it. So to the specific person who asked about the words of encouragement to her granddaughter returning to high school. So yeah, that's an interesting situation. And it's not just high school sophomores who are dealing with it. It would also be 7th graders in middle school. And as Sarah said, it would also be 2nd graders. We have groups of kids who have not been in the physical school for 18 months and they're coming back. And in those cases, they're coming back to a school that they weren't at in March of 2020. And so there's this kind of disorientation that's along with it, not just in terms of coming back to school, but I don't even know the school. Sarah may have some thoughts about it from a elementary level, or Mike may from middle school. But for me, at the high school level, what I would say is at our school, we have something called, oh my God, I just lost it. Oh, there we go. Flight school. It's called flight school because our mascot is the eagle. But and at flight school, we have a half day of events that incoming 9th graders have. Well, this year we're having 2 flight schools. We're having one for incoming 9th graders and we're having one for incoming 10th graders, because the incoming 10th graders, most of them were not at school last year. And so in very practical ways, they are freshmen. They are not in the social emotional sense in that they have been with peers for a year and they've made some transition from middle to high school, which is good. But in terms of the practicality, where is the cafeteria? Where is the attendance office? Where, they don't know that information any more than our rising 9th graders do. So we're having those events. I realized that the person who wrote that letter or question there may not go to my school, but I would think that most high schools do have some sort of welcome to high school event over the summertime. It should be happening this week or next week, since kids aren't back most high school kids aren't back in the classroom for a couple of weeks yet. I would also encourage that person to, again, reach out to the students' teachers. At the very beginning of the school year, by the end of August, there will be a meet the teacher night of some sort. There may be a virtual component and an in-person component, depending on where we are with COVID, but take advantage of those events. But I would also encourage that person to recognize that it's not as bewildering as they think it might be for their grandchild, because she did spend an entire year last year in classes with kids. Even though it was virtual, there was interaction, there were bonds that were made. And with this generation being so much more communicative through texting and other virtual methods than we were when we were in high school, they didn't exist when we were in high school. I wouldn't discount that kind of bonding that went on last year, even if it wasn't in a physical high school environment.
Thank you. for
I just would like to add, I mean, I think everybody at any school level recognizes that there's a significant portion of kids that are coming back into the building, regardless of whether they've been in this building or a different building. And so we're very intentional at the beginning of the school year with teaching and reteaching procedures and where things are and all of that. Like, that's support that a lot of students are going to need, not even just the ones who are in a different building. I mean, kids haven't been in the building in 18 months and they now might be on the second floor when they were on the first floor before. And just the sheer navigation and the support as to, like, this is what school is like and these are our expectations, are things we're all gonna have to do at the beginning of the school year.
Well, I cannot thank you three enough for taking the time, and my goodness, your answers were so thorough and right to the point. I'm very hopeful that this school year will start well and go smoothly and only get better as we continue on. I would ask that we all give a round of applause to turn off your mute so they can hear your applause. It really was fantastic. Thank you so much for doing this for us. We were only a few minutes beyond our goal of not going too long, so I really appreciate it. Thank you to all of you that came and listened. I hope you found it beneficial. And we remember it is recorded, and I'll work with Trevor to figure out how we get that out to all of you to know that you can share it with other family friends that you might have. Michael and Chuck and Sarah, good luck this school year. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Everyone have a wonderful rest of your evening, and maybe we'll see you next year.